What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Week 9 fantasy football edition of the Sharp Angles podcast. I am your host, Raymond Summerlin, and I am joined, as I am every single Thursday morning, by the one, the only, the great, the Swami of Konami himself, Mr. Rich Hribar. How you doing, Rich?
I'm doing good. We've never had a conversation about our intro music. It's very much like a like 80s like sultry vibe. I kind of dig it.
Yeah, no, I'm a fan of it. What's really funny is in the room that we record in, for whatever reason, the way it comes through to my headphones is very crackly. So it's almost like a horror, like an 80s horror movie. Like you're only getting like bits of the sultry music. So yeah, it's I've always enjoyed that part of the intro is me just I only hear it on the podcast in full form, and at that point, I hear it in 1.5. By the way, we've never talked about this. Are you a 1.5? You're a 2 person? Are you listening to the podcast just one speed, like a wild man? What do you do? What's your
Yeah.
podcast speed?
I generally am a one percenter, man. I leave it base. Like base. So
Wow.
I try to ruin it for people. 'Cause, I mean, I've heard people say they try to listen to me at 2x, and I try to make it. I try to speed up my cadence, make it even harder for you 2xers. I try to even pack more words per minute, like the Micro Machine man. What was his name? The Micro Machine guy.
Oh, I don't remember. The one from Police Academy. Who are we talking about here?
Yeah. The guy that just like talked real fast. Like, I don't talk that fast, but I'm a fast talker.
The only person in my head that talks real fast is Twista,
Ah,
the rapper.
Midwest Choppa.
Yeah, there we go, baby. Slow jams. And so yeah, that's the only one that comes into my mind. But anyway, yeah, no, 1.5.
His name is
Two,
John Machida.
John Machida. John Machida. That does not click in my brain at
I'm
all.
happy to see
But
him.
I'm glad.
He's still living. He's still amongst us too. I'm happy to see that. A nice 69 years old, John Machida.
Nice. Shout out to John. Big fans over here, obviously. Shout out.
And I
Shout
try
out to
to I
John.
try to ruin it for you 2xers. Trying to give you guys a lot of information. Like, what did you say?
I remember. I don't even think I speak necessarily slow, but I am a Southerner. I am from Texas, and we used to work with another Southerner, Nick Minzio. And I remember when he and I were on podcasts together, we would always get comments about how we were talking like our mouths were full of molasses, like we just the slowest talking people. And I go, well, that's your fault. You should be on 2 times anyway. It's not my fault. This is a you problem. This is a you problem. Anyway, we actually have an interesting week to talk about. We have some good games today, Richard. At least what are this week. At least what we hope are good games. Is I guess what I should say. So we've got some interesting things to talk about. Before we get into that, I do want to mention you go over to sharpfootballanalysis.com. You can find a ton of content over there. Warren Sharp wrote a takedown of Josh McDaniels. I really enjoyed when Josh McDaniels got fired at whatever it was, 1 a.m. Eastern on Halloween night. I got like a Slack message from Warren going, "Oh yeah, I'm going to write something," and then I got that something at 4:17 a.m. Eastern. I was like, "Oh yeah, he's in his bag now." So that's a fun article. So go and read that. You can go and read all of Rich's worksheet articles over the previews for every single game. It's just help you get better at betting, get better at fantasy. All of that is over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. If you use the code ANGLES, you can get 15% off anything over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. So go and check that out. That code is actually in the YouTube description, which is a good reminder. If you're listening to this as a podcast, first of all, we appreciate that and put it on 1.5 times. And the second thing is you can actually do this live every single a Thursday morning at 11:30 Eastern time over at our YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Warren Sharp, hit subscribe, and you'll be able to find us. All right, let's get to it. Time for some real or fake. I think the first thing we need to get into with the real or fake is the unfortunate situation in Minnesota with Kirk Cousins getting knocked out for the year with a torn Achilles that was so obviously a torn Achilles when it first happened that it was just deflating. I went, oh yeah, I was getting excited. We were so close to getting Justin Jefferson back, or at least it seemed like we were close. I was like, all right, we're going to have a good stretch run. And now Kirk Cousins is gone. So I guess we have to talk about the Vikings offense, real or fake, without Kirk Cousins. It looks like it will be Jaren Hall this week, probably Josh Dobbs after that at some point after they traded for him at the deadline. I mean, if Justin
Maybe
Jefferson
Nick
comes
Mullins.
back, Nick Mullins, he's on IR. He's eligible to return
Week
next
10.
week in week 10. So Justin Jefferson, if he's playing, he's going to be in your lineup, I would assume. But when we look at the rest of this offense, T.J. Hockenson, Jordan Addison, this week, even without Justin Jefferson, kind of what are you doing with these guys, and kind of what are you hoping to see?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing you can't really do with Jordan Addison, TJ. Like, you can't bench these guys, but you have to penalize him just because from a top-down stance, this offense is just structurally going to be different. I mean, this is a team that's just was so reliant on the pass. And, it's a bummer for Kirk Cousins because he's a guy that, like, obviously he's got big dad energy. He gets made fun of a lot. Like, he was playing excellent. Kirk Cousins was having an
Yeah,
excellent season.
he was doing really good. Yeah.
All of their touchdowns but one have come through the air. A league high 79.3% of all their yards this season has come via passing. Like, this team hasn't been able to run the football at all. And now you're removing a quarterback that was playing really well from it. I do have some faith in Kevin O'Connell to like structurally get some things in order, like we saw last year with McVay, like trying to hodgepodge his way through like all the quarterbacks they ran. Granted, the receiver situation is just not as poor, so at least that will help things, especially when we get Justin Jefferson back. But yeah, I mean, you have to just anticipate like a natural recoil here. I want to have faith in Jaren Hall. He was a guy like my model kind of liked him a little bit. He's athletic, but I mean, 3% of all NFL quarterbacks drafted around 4 or later have averaged 200 passing yards per game. Like the expectations have to be so low here. Like, even saying Jaren Hall can exceed expectations, it's only because the expectations are low. They're very low. So it's very tough to say like we're going to get like a high run out here. I think you have to penalize everybody. Like, what can you do with Hockenson? What can you do with Addison? Like, these are guys you got to play at this point.
Yeah, and specifically on Hockenson at tight end, you just have to
Yes.
play him. What I will say is that with a rookie quarterback who didn't really push the ball down the field in the preseason that much. By the way, a 15.8% sack rate in the preseason. That is less than ideal. 54.2% completion rate. So it wasn't great in the preseason. So, take that with a grain of salt. It's a preseason. He was a rookie, but that's certainly not a great sign. I think you could see, especially until Jefferson gets back, Hockenson be even more involved if that's possible. And so maybe that's good for him. Maybe it's good for a guy like Brandon Powell, who's going to be used maybe more creatively around the line of scrimmage. Maybe he gets a few more targets. But I think your overall point that this hurts the entire offense, which means it hurts every single fantasy player, I think that's the right takeaway. And to your point about the running game, in this situation, for if you're a different team, you would think to yourself, all right, we're going to emphasize the running game, and the running game just doesn't work for this team. And we've seen them try. We obviously saw them try trade for Cam Akers. Cam Akers got a little bit more run. It still didn't work. Madison has kind of taken a little bit back over last week. At least we'll see what the split is there and how that kind of ebbs and flows. Free Ty Chandler is what I always
It's a
say.
slappers
And
only
so,
backfield for sure, man. It is
yeah,
slappers only in that backfield.
it's just, yeah, it's not. What a call. What a what a reference there. It took me a second. I was like, what the heck is he talking about? But yeah, that's a winner. Yeah, so like the running game doesn't work. It's probably not going to work now, especially that we don't have Kirk Cousins and the whole offense is hurt. So even though you might get, I don't know, a few more targets or a better target share for TJ Hockenson, and you're going to play him because he's a tight end, it's rough. It's tough. What I will say is we do have a kind of writers conference call every Wednesday. It's definitely my favorite meeting of the week. I will say that. Apologies to everybody else that I'm in meetings with. But Ryan McChrystal, who will be on the
Your
YouTube
favorite trip to the
channel
dentist.
tonight. Yeah, exactly. the Ryan McChrystal will be on the YouTube channel tonight with Todd doing their betting and DFS preview. He mentioned, and he's obviously our college football guy, our draft guy. He mentioned that Jaren Hall was not drafted because of age and injury concerns, but he's healthy now and he has a lot of starting experience. So maybe he does surprise. But to your point, if he surprises, is that 215 yards and 2 touchdowns? Like, is that the level of that we're getting with a surprise? And so that's kind of the issue.
Oh, this is the Arthur Smith dream, probably, right? Like, this game could be 17-16, and he'll be so giddy.
Yeah. But we do need to move on to another person that, like, and this is an example of we don't know anything. I played a lot of Atlanta Falcons defense last week. I played a lot of Atlanta Falcons defense last week because I thought Will Levis was going to struggle like he did in college with negative plays and with interceptions. And we didn't really see that against the Falcons. Instead, he threw 4 touchdown passes. He pushed the ball down the field. He showed off the electric arm that we know that he has, and he pretty much avoided those negative plays, and he pretty much avoided those sacks. And so the real or fake question here is, as we move forward, what do you think we're going to see from this Titans offense? They play on Thursday night, so if you're listening to this after in the podcast form on Friday, then you'll already know the answer to this. But kind of moving forward, what are we expecting to see from Will Levis?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just let him play the rest of the year if you're the Titans. Obviously, we'll see what ends up happening. But we did see like the upside though. Like this is why Will Levis was at one point in the conversation of people thought he was going to maybe even go top 5 to some teams. You know, he obviously that was like a lot of smoke towards the end of the draft season, but like he's a tools guy. The dude has a howitzer. He's a big athletic quarterback. Like he looks like he just came out of the gym. I mean, that touchdown he threw to Nick Westbrook-Ikhine was in like not many dudes are making that play. And that's like what got the allure of like, all right, well, this is why we maybe take a shot on Will Levis. Now we'll see how much variance is. Obviously, small sample. Titans fans all know too better, but the experience of the last quarterback to throw for 4 passing touchdowns in their debut was Marcus Mariota. So
twist that knife.
Titans fans know that. Like the rest of that story was told. I mean, obviously, when you have like the production come on all those deep balls, there's the sustainability factor. I mean, under pressure, he was still 4 of 11. On third downs, he was still really bad. So like just hitting big plays, like, all right, you showed us the big plays. Now show us playing quarterback, right? That's what we still need to see built out in the sample. And that's not a detriment saying to run and hide from it. I think they should play him the rest of the year, but that's what we need to see. It's the playing quarterback aspect that was always held Will Levis back, not what we saw last week.
Exactly. What I will say is that, and I watched Will Levis play in
Penn
college.
State. Yeah, Penn State.
Because I am where's my cup? There we go. I'm a Penn State fan. So here we go. I watched him play in college, and that arm has been amazing for a long time. But like I continue to say, he did beat out Sean Clifford for a reason. Sean Clifford, NFL quarterback Sean Clifford. Congratulations, Sean. Get your money. But he didn't beat out Sean Clifford for a reason. And then we saw his last year in college, we saw him really struggle with those negative plays and sacks. And just because we didn't see it for one game doesn't mean we're not going to see it later. However, seeing that talent on an NFL field, it's different to see it on an NFL field, to see, oh yeah, this guy is different than from an arm perspective than even like the quarterbacks that we think have a strong arm. Like it was just, it was wild to see some of the throws. You mentioned that Westbrook-Ikhine throw off his back foot, just launching that thing. It really was impressive. And I'm hopeful that he can harness that he can avoid the mistakes, avoid the sacks, avoid the negative plays, play better under pressure, which that's going to be a concern tonight against the Steelers defense. And then, see where he goes from there. Kind of a related question. We have a question here in the chat from Josh, which was, would you trade Lamar, Jacoby Myers, and Demario Douglas for Hurts and D-Hop? And his real question here, and I appreciate you, Josh, simplifying the question here. Does D-Hop or Myers have more rest of season value? What do you see with those two players?
Oh yeah, DeAndre Hopkins for me. I mean, one, he's the better football player. And then 2, we're getting, the Raiders situation is like turmoil filled. Like it's a bad vibes energy, like situation for the Raiders the rest of the year, right? Like, is there to be like,
well, did the bad vibes leave the building? Like that's the question. The bad vibes might have left the building. They might be gone now.
Maybe, but this just like open in a question because Aiden O'Connell hasn't targeted Jacoby Myers. A very small sample, but he hasn't targeted him at all. 10.5% of his routes when he's been under center. It's just, and Jacoby Myers is already a guy that was living like on touchdowns that we knew were going to eventually pull back anyways. So I'm just going to I'll just take my chances with the guy I think's the better football player, but I don't think either guy's a wide receiver 1 or anything.
Yeah, I'll say the Demario Douglas part of that trade does make me a little bit nervous because I do think, and I mean, it's the Patriots offense. You're not going to get terribly excited, and he's going to get, if he's doing well, he's going to have 10 yards per catch, something like that. Like that's what we're looking at with a guy like Demario Douglas, but he could get 27-28% of the targets in New England. Who else are they targeting now?
I was certain Demario Douglas is going to be your uncut gem.
I do like Demario Douglas. I should actually, now that you mention it, that probably should have been.
I was like, well, Ray's going to take Demario Douglas. So
yeah, you're right. I did add him literally everywhere. That's a all right. That's an early honorable mention uncut gem for everybody. Is Demario Douglas. So there you go.
He's gonna be one of the most popular DFS guys this week because of his salary.
Well, absolutely. He is a person that I will not be I will not have in a lot of lineups because I don't know what the ceiling really is, and he's going to be in a ton of lineups. I got a question here. Do you guys expect Achane to have the same role when he gets back? That's an interesting question that we'll talk a little bit more about when we get to Dolphins and Chiefs. But what I will say, just kind of real quick in passing, is that there appears to be a role here for Achane because what we've seen from Mostert, and we just talk about it now, Mostert from a usage perspective recently has, especially last week, has been, I don't know, it's it's not, again, we're vibes in here. It's not great vibes, kind of what we've seen, kind of Raheem Mostert's usage, right?
Yeah, but I mean, that should be expected. I mean, it's the one, you've got an explosive offense. We've got a 31-year-old running back that was probably forced into more usage early in the season than they intended. It was just kind of out of necessity. And now that you've got Jeff Wilson back, you've got Salvon Ahmed back. Because remember, he missed a stretch that when they elevated Achane. So we just had a little bit of pullback here. And I think that was always kind of the plan with this backfield, was probably to keep all of these guys that they're playing in the rotation, like around like that 12 to maybe 15 touch mark, right? And it just like circumstantially elevated most early in the season.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I am interested to see that they brought Jeff Wilson back, and then he hasn't really had a ton of
He's
workload,
not very good.
So
the thing with Jeff Wilson is he's a ham and egger. Like, he doesn't do anything special. He's like he does the right things and but he doesn't do anything. He doesn't wow you. And now that they have a guy like Achane, when Achane comes back, and we've already seen the genie out of the bottle with Achane of like, when it's going well, this is what 10 yards per carry. Well,
exactly.
Like, it's going to be hard to not play him.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be quite the same as it was before the injury, but I think that they're going to use him, and with his explosive ability, he's going to be, in my opinion, very useful for fantasy. So I'm excited to kind of see that we get back. One more question here from Evan: would you drop Michael Mayer for Quentin Logan at tight end? Yeah, I don't think you should be. I don't think Michael Mayer is somebody that you should have as your second tight end. Dropping over Quentin Johnson, though, how much do you think of what we saw last week from Quentin Johnson was them actually trying to get him involved, or just Josh Palmer getting hurt? Like, what's kind of the split there?
I think it's still probably a little bit of both. I mean, Palmer came in the week banged up. They had to have more of necessity to get Quentin Johnson involved. I was happy the way they used him, though. You know, he was running those drags and getting the football to where he could use his yards after the catch ability. But I mean, it's probably the run out for either of those guys. I would still say I would just rather have Quentin Johnson, because like the ceiling outcome for Quentin Johnson is just a lot better than like holding out for a tight end, right? Like, just like holding a tight end too.
In general, I do not want a second tight end on my team.
Yes.
In normal size leagues that aren't tight end.
I don't have teams with just one good tight end, let alone like holding two bad ones.
I am currently in a dynasty league that I'm trying to tear down, that you're a part of, by the way. If you need a tight end, hit me up. I'm trying to like sell Gerald Everett and Taysom Hill for whatever I can get for them.
They're tough dynasty sales.
Well, obviously, but like, if you don't have a tight end, like, I don't really know what you're starting, and if you wanted to win. So there you go. I'm trying to sell him. Maybe get a 4th round pick out of him. We'll see how it goes. Interesting, kind of going back to that Achane question, we're going to have a similar situation, but to a much larger degree in Detroit whenever David Montgomery gets back. I'm assuming he'll be back. They're on bye this week. I'm assuming he'll be back after their bye week, but that's an assumption. He didn't practice at all this past week, and so maybe that's an assumption. But we've seen Jahmyr Gibbs just absolutely explode over the last 2 weeks. His usage explode, and I wonder if, like you said with Achane, kind of the genie's out of the bottle now, and I wonder what kind of a role David Montgomery will be coming back to. Kind of how you see that situation.
Yeah, I see it similar to kind of probably the Jamal split like last year. Just kind of has worked out for David. No, David Montgomery was probably always kind of like a sell high anyways, because of just how many points he was getting off of touchdowns, right? Like, it was just going to be unsustainable. 42.3% of his fantasy production has come from rushing touchdowns alone. Like, that's just an unsustainable rate of production. So that was always going to be like kind of a pullback that wasn't going to be able to like live over the course of the season. So yeah, I mean, it sucks that he got hurt because he probably missed like a window to like really cash out on David Montgomery. Not that he's gonna be a bad play, but he's probably going to be back to being like a touchdown dependent play. Like if David Montgomery doesn't have a touchdown in a given week, like he's not catching any passes and you're getting hollow yardage. So, and granted, that's fine. Like in this Lions offense, like you can just play a guy that's a touchdown, like our bust RB2 type of guy. We're all playing some really bad running backs in some leagues anyways, but I definitely think that David Montgomery was already living his best fantasy life prior to the injury.
Yeah. Hi, Darrell Henderson. Please keep doing what you're doing because I need you in I need you in several leagues. So I do appreciate that. I mean, that split was so heavily favored towards Montgomery though before the injury in the first 6 weeks. Jahmyr Gibbs had 23.8% of the carries and 18 targets. And one of those games, by the way, David Montgomery missed, and that still didn't work out for him. What I think's been interesting the last 2 games is that Jahmyr Gibbs has 15 targets in the last 2 games. And so like that's involvement's increased. So does that offer, we haven't seen this Lions team really target the running backs a ton. So are they going to continue to get him involved there? I think for this, I'm more worried about Jahmyr Gibbs because I think that we've seen now that if Jahmyr Gibbs is going to get the touches, he can produce. He can be a running back one. He can be kind of what people were drafting him to be whenever he was being taken, and what he got as high as the 3rd round, right, which was madness. But I think he got all the way up to the 3rd round, and so I think this is more a question of with Jahmyr Gibbs, we're not going to go back to all the way where we were, but are we going to go back to him kind of being like, well, I hope he gets 6 catches kind of situation? And
Yeah,
I'm
he's going to
pretty
be very
worried that that's
James
where we get
James
there.
Cookie and still.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, and if he's James Cook, we'll talk about James Cook later. If he's James Cook, then you're like, all right, well, I guess I'm starting this guy because running back is terrible, but I'm not excited about it, which is bad because the last 2 weeks you've been excited about playing Jahmyr Gibbs, so it's kind
Yeah,
of
I mean
not great.
it's a bummer. That's why fantasy football, like it's always about like being in on like the right pockets of production, right, and not worried about like the total season long stats. You just got to take in these pockets where like Jahmyr Gibbs is an RB1 and you can confidently play him, and just try to take advantage of those spots. We have very finite amount of players that are good every week in fantasy football.
That's right. Keep running hot, Christian McCaffrey. We're gonna miss you this week. One more here for real or fake, and that is Trey McBride. Trey McBride over the last 3 weeks, by the way, is 4th in tight end targets. Obviously, he had 14 last week, but he had 5 and 6 before that. So we kind of expected we would see that. I was not heavy on Trey McBride last week in DFS because the Ravens had been absolutely shutting down tight ends. But that didn't matter. That's a great sign for Trey McBride. But I guess kind of moving forward, the question is this offense going to change now that Josh Dobbs is in Minnesota? Are we going to see fewer tight end targets? Because Josh Dobbs targeted tight ends on 31.5% of his career targets. Another good sign for TJ Hawkinson, by the way, to bring that back to the other one. And so are we going to see as many tight end targets if they get Kyler Murray back, when they get Kyler Murray back? I think that's an open question. So how are you viewing Trey McBride as we kind of move forward?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to what we talked about with Dalton Kincaid last week, though. I mean, we've got a player with pedigree, collegiate pedigree. I mean, he was the Mackey winner when he came out, was the most productive tight end in that draft class by a mile, and he's got an opportunity. I am a little bit concerned about just like the overall target volume with the Josh Dobbs stuff, but I mean, he's going to get a quarterback upgrade, so that's a factor, and he's going to get better quarterback play, which could help. So we have potentially more scoring opportunities, but it just adds him into this bucket of, at least until Zach Ertz comes back, that we're going to have a guy on the field the entire time was a good prospect and has a pathway to opportunity at tight end. Like what more can we really ask for, right? That's like all we're looking for at the position. So not a good matchup again this week, but we would have again said the same thing last week. So you just got to take the opportunity and I think plug him in as the back end tight end one and let Jesus take the wheel, man. This week makes it a little sketchier, Clayton Tune, but Kyler's come back next week.
Yeah. Yeah, Kyler will definitely be back next week. So I'll be interested to see. Kyler has not targeted tight ends. Of course, he hasn't really had great options, and it was in Cliff
Max
Kingsbury's
Williams.
offense. Exactly. And Cliff Kingsbury doesn't target tight ends. And so, there's a lot of system involved in that. So we'll we'll see how it goes. Let's move on, talk about a few of these very interesting games we have this week. Before we do that, I do want to mention that Rich Hribar has written a comprehensive preview of every single game for week 9, which you can find over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Use code ANGLES. You can get 15% off of our fantasy package, which gives you access to all of those. So make sure you go and check that out. First game up, Dolphins and Chiefs early on Sunday morning, messing with my Sunday morning routine, my DFS lineup building. At least this time it's good. Don't look at what the one for next week's going to be. The one for next week is it's Colts Patriots. I don't know how excited we're going to get about waking up for that one, but this week we have an exciting one to wake up for. Dolphins and Chiefs. Chiefs obviously coming off of a very disappointing loss. The Dolphins have had 2 opportunities to have marquee wins this year. They got thumped in both of those. Both of these teams need a win. I'm very excited about this game. However, if I'm looking at this game from a is this going to shoot out perspective, I think the first question is this Chiefs offense okay? Is there a problem with this Chiefs offense? Because they scored 41 against the Bears. They scored 21 in the second quarter against the Chargers in one quarter. But in their other 27 quarters this year, they've scored 125 points. That's an 18.5 point per game, full game average. There's something wrong here. You've mentioned it. They're not scoring in the second half as well. I'm very concerned about this offense. I mean, it's Patrick Mahomes, Danny Reed. They're going to figure it out, I would imagine. But as it stands right now, I'm pretty concerned about kind of where this offense is.
I mean, we've done this for 4 years with the Chiefs. It's 4 years running. This is an unserious regular season team. Like they do this every year. We've done it. Like, has everyone solved the Chiefs 2 years ago where they had like that 4-game stretch where Mahomes threw like 6 yards per pass attempt? They changed the ADOT. Like, this is a team that finds its way by the time when they actually start caring about the actual games, and not that you don't have to win games to get there.
Do they actually care about this one then? That's the question.
Yeah,
because if they don't, that matters.
They do. I mean, I don't want to say they don't care about any games. Like last week, you had Mahomes with the flu stuff the week before. Like, it's easy to kind of throw out kind of what happened in that game as a division game. You've been harping on the teams getting the look ahead for the international stuff for a while. Probably maybe overlooked at a team that they, had just beaten 2 weeks in a row. Just like a lot of elements went into play. But for fantasy,
just so people know, because I don't think I've ever mentioned that on the podcast.
Oh, I'm in podcast.
Teams before the international game over the last 2 years, I'm this off the top of my head, I believe they're now 5-11-1 against the spread with some bad outright losses in there. The Ravens lost they had to the Colts was that before the international game? Ravens had one bad thing happen to them before the international game. And so, yeah, it has not been good before the international game. That's something to think about this week with the Colts and with the Patriots, just as an aside, because I don't think I've ever brought that up. There you go.
Yeah, they lost this. That was the Ravens-Steelers game.
Well, the Steelers. So they lost that game to the Steelers that they had no business losing. There you go.
Yeah, when all their players dropped 100 passes.
Yeah, there you go. It's something weird about it. There's something to this international thing, I'm telling you.
Yeah, but I mean, the context of the Chiefs for fantasy football, because like it's like that's probably more of like a real life like over, because for the Chiefs from like a fantasy football stance, like nothing still changes for how we're treating his offense, right? Like, we've got maybe one wide receiver we're semi-interested in, and we're playing Travis Kelce, and we're forced to play Isaiah Pacheco through thick or thin at this point because of the running back landscape and the amount of touches he's getting into. But like nothing else like really changes like for us. So like us having those conversations, like I used to always have in years past with Dan Pizzuto when it wasn't a fantasy show, like we don't really have to have those right now. Like the Chiefs are going to find if it's a problem in the playoffs, and like they haven't gotten to this point or solved anything, like, yeah, maybe. But like we've done this for 4 damn years in a row with the Chiefs, where like they have these like a month stretches where they do jack shit and it doesn't matter.
I think it matters from the context of, well, it depends, I guess. It depends on how you characterize fantasy. But I assume a lot of people are going to get excited about this game. They're going to be playing single game DFS in this game. Obviously, it's not part of the main slate. And so I would say that Patrick Mahomes is going to be on 80% of showdown rosters, something like that. And that's probably correct. He probably should be on that many, but it's at least interesting to think about the other side of this. If this offense continues to struggle, you mentioned it was against the Broncos. They scored 19 against the Broncos the two weeks before that. So it wasn't like it was just this international game. This has been they scored what 23 against the Jets. They scored 17 against the Jaguars. Obviously, it was without Travis Kelce, but they struggled offensively against the Lions. This is a long running thing. This isn't just like a recent thing. And so I think from a fantasy perspective, it's more of a expectations thing. You can't get away from Travis Kelce at all by any means. But in a showdown lineup, could you maybe omit Patrick Mahomes and go very heavy on the Dolphins and maybe get a little bit unique that way? I think it could be interesting. That said, if this game explodes, I mean, we know what Patrick Mahomes can do. He can just throw for 400 yards and 5 touchdowns, and that's it. So that's the game you're playing. On Pacheco, I'm glad you mentioned that he's been struggling. 3.6 yards per carry over his last 4 games. Just 5.7% of his carries have been 10 yards or more. Hasn't been creating goal to go situations. He's 24th in goal to go rushes over the last month among running backs. You're right. You have to keep playing them. But again, from a DFS perspective, again, this could be a situation where we're comfortable omitting Pacheco from our showdown lineup. So that's kind of the way I'm thinking about all of this.
Yeah, and it's just like more of the micro stuff because even with the Chiefs like having like all the production you laid out, like Mahomes has still been a top 10 quarterback in every game except for 3, right? And like that's the like where the landscape we live in for fantasy football this year. I mean, Tua is probably the MVP. If the season ended today, he wins MVP. Tua hasn't even had back-to-back QB1 games yet this season for fantasy football. Like Lamar has 3 games as the QB 20 or lower. Like that's the context we live in. But like all the core Chiefs guys are all still getting there through this. Like Kelce is just rattling off tight end 1 weeks. Like Mahomes is still, like I said, top 10 every week but 3. So like, and Pacheco still is living as an RB2. I think there was a stretch there where we were kind of getting excited about Pacheco being like a fringe RB1, and that's like the brakes have kind of been pumped on that. Like we were getting maybe a little bit too excited because he still does have that issue of when the Chiefs get inside the 5, they do a lot of different things. They're a team that likes, again, this is an unserious regular season team. Like we have years of this where like they do things that are kind of unorthodox. They don't go through the motions, but like they do goofy stuff, man. Like this is, and then, hey,
around the rosy, man.
Like they do all kinds of things. So Mahomes or Pacheco was saving his floor though, so he's getting that little sprinkling of receiving work, which we didn't have last year, which is great because at this point last year, like you were dying on these Pacheco games. Like you were like, oh, like if he had a game like last week, you're just like, oh, this is unusable. But at least he's catching some passes in these games. Like 2 weeks ago, he had a game where he still had 10 PPR points, that a touchdown. That would have never happened his rookie season. So at least you're getting that. But yeah, I think there was just you pumped the brakes on the Pacheco. The Jets game kind of unlocked. I was like, well, if we can get this every week, like we're cooking. Like, man, Andy Reid back. Like, and now I think that we just pull back on that now.
Yeah, until this offense clicks, and maybe that's what happens after their bye week, and they go, okay, I guess we need to get serious to try to get the number 1 seed, and then Pacheco's right back. You mentioned the one wide receiver that you're quasi interested in, our friend Rashee Rice, who we talk about every week. Hi, Rashee Rice. I hope you're doing very well. He was up to 61.8% route participation over the last 2 games. It was 35% over the first 6 games, with none over 51%. He's very clearly their best option at wide receiver. I'm not sure how much they trust them. I'm not sure how excited Andy Reid is about having his number 1 receiver be a rookie, but here we are. And so if this game pops off, I think that, he's going to be a good bet. Another guy that's going to be a good bet if it goes wild is Jalen Waddle. Finally hit last week. For real hit last week. He does have 3 touchdowns over his last 4 games, 27.6% target share over that span. I am remain excited about Jalen Waddle. We're kind of back to that. They're either throwing to Hill or they're throwing to Waddle or throwing to nobody. And it's
the dream
in this offense that's going to work out more often than
not. Yeah. The past 4 weeks, only Tyreek Hill, his teammate, Jahmyr Chase, and Amon-Ra St. Brown have been targeted at a higher rate per route than Jalen Waddle. So like we're getting the usage we want. We're not getting the downfield stuff like we did last year. That's kind of like the only like kind of one bugaboo is that over that span, only 8.1% of his targets have been deep targets, 19.1% for Hill. So like Hill's still soaking up like all of like the targets that are like soaked in fantasy fat, so to speak. We're still getting those for Tyreek only, but Waddle is that's what the usage we want from him in this offense. You're going to run into more good weeks than not in that scenario. Like I said, I'm curious about the Tua stuff. I think Tua is interesting. This is another test for him. We've had him in these spots and he's kind of let down. The Chiefs defense still is really good, even though last week they had a step back. They give the 3 passing touchdowns to Russ. They allowed 6 yards per pass attempt still in that game. Like, still a pretty good defense.
One of those touchdowns was that short field touchdown.
Yeah.
I think another one of the touchdowns was an odd one too. So yeah, that felt more fluky. The real thing was that they held down that passing attack pretty much for the entire day.
So I mean, we've had Tua in a couple of years. Again, if Tua is a QB1 this week, it'll be the first time he's been a QB1 back-to-back weeks all season.
Yeah, and the Dolphins, I mean, I mentioned this at the top. They need this win. Like they need a resume win if we're going to start trusting them. And they haven't had it yet, and their 2 opportunities have gone very poorly. To be fair, they're both on the road. This one, I guess, is kind of on the road, but it's different. And so, yeah, we'll see it. Soaked in fantasy fat. I've never heard soaked in fantasy fat. What things do you soak in fat? I'm very confused.
Have you heard of Joshua Weissman? Have you ever watched him? His cooking videos?
I have not. No.
Well, yeah, he remade McDonald's old fries with the animal fat, like beef tallow, and I've been thinking about how much I want to eat like an old McDonald's French fry, like when we were kids, and just trying to remember what they tasted like. So like the youths don't know. I tried to explain to my kids, they don't know. These McDonald's fries are counterfeit.
These McDonald's fries. My favorite thing, the worst thing about the McDonald's fries is that if you get them in a bag and get home, by the time you get home, they're inedible. And I don't know how that's possible. McDonald's fries and nachos are the only 2 things that go from amazing to disgusting in 3 minutes. It's wild how quick they do it. But you are right. The fries they've taken a step back, and I miss the good old days. The nuggets too. I liked when they came out with the nuggets, like, oh, they're all white meat. These are actually, actual chicken are in our nuggets now. And I ate it and went, no, let's go back to the fake stuff. The fake stuff, that was a winning formula at McDonald's. But here we are. All right, let's move on to
it's also a Tyreek
Cowboys.
Hill revenge game, man.
Oh yeah, I forgot we have to walk down Narrative Street. Any other fun narratives we need to walk down? We missed the Scotty Miller revenge game a couple weeks ago, so that was a mistake.
He scored a touchdown last week, Scotty Miller.
He did. He scored that touchdown. So we need to keep walking down Narrative Street. Put it in the chat. Any Narrative Street stuff we missed in the chat. All right, let's get to Cowboys and Eagles. I think the most important thing out of this game from a fantasy perspective is Jalen Hurts healthy? And I don't know the answer to that question. I saw a reporter asked him about his knee yesterday, and I believe it was yesterday, and he just kind of like walked off. He wouldn't answer the question, which is an interesting decision. Although I suppose he's probably been asked about it a few times recently, so maybe that's a justifiable thing. He's not on the injury report, which that seems like some injury report shenanigans to me. Like how much do you think this is affecting him? Kind of how worried are you about kind of where he is from a health perspective?
It's tough to say. They're calling it a bone bruise. We don't really know what's going on. There was a report that after the game on Sunday, he required like an hour-long treatment for his knee. So it's like, these are all just vague things. I'm no doctor. I don't know what's going on. I just listen to the PTs on Twitter tell us what's going on, but he only scrambled 1 time last week. And in the week before, he only ran for 21 yards. So like, it's clearly something is reducing his rushing mobility, and we would want him to be able to run in this game, because it's one thing to just drop back and throw for 300 yards in the Commanders. Everyone's done it. You ain't going to drop back. Like, the probability of him just dropping back and as his drop back passer and just shredding the Cowboys is probably in the lower range of outcomes. We did see Brock Purdy do it a couple weeks ago, so maybe it's not impossible, but I would say that it's still probably in the lower end of game outcomes here. So we would want that mobility to be here. They are on bye next week too, so we're going to get a week. So it's just something we're going to have to live with. I mean, you're not going to bench Jalen Hurts. I think, like you said, talking about like what we talked about in the context of the last game, it just may be like, if you're stacking this game from DFS, it's a really terrible main slate. We've got some good matchups, but like this main slate is horrendous, maybe the worst of the season. So like, does that push you to like play more Lamar Jackson instead of Jalen Hurts, because they're the only 2 front end quarterbacks on the board this week? So does that push more ownership to Lamar? Like, those are the types of like micro things that can impact. But he only threw for 155 yards in his 1 game against Dallas last year. It was the second fewest yards in a game passing last year. It's also the first time we're going to see Dak and Hurts kind of play like with both of these teams, like where they are, because Dak didn't play in the first game last year. Hurts didn't play in the second game last year. So it'll be a fun matchup here. This game is huge for like real football like circumstances. Because the Eagles coming out of the bye also play the Chiefs and the Bills coming out of the bye. Like, this is a massive stretch for the Eagles. So
the Eagles schedule is worse than that even. And I'm going to bring it up real quick.
They'll play the 49ers after that.
The Eagles schedule is wild after the bye. So they get Dallas, then they have the bye, then they're at Kansas City versus the Bills versus the 49ers, at Dallas, and then at Seattle. All of those teams are arguably, we'll see what the 49ers are able to do after their bye, but all of those teams are arguably top 8 teams. Top 8 teams is what we're talking about, and that's what they have just back to back to back to back to back to back here. We're going to learn a lot about the Eagles. They're 7-1 now. They're number 1 in my power rankings because who else is going to be? But we're going to learn a lot about this team over the next few weeks and kind of where they are. And it'll be interesting to see if maybe they have a 49er in. I don't even know what I would say there. I don't even know how I would do it. But it'll be interesting to see if they, where kind of they stand after this. I
can't wait to have the Eagles dead conversations in 3 weeks. I'm so looking forward to them.
I can't wait. I can't wait for those conversations. They're going to be fine, but it is a tough stretch.
Yeah.
On the other side of it, or at least on the receiver side of it, AJ Brown. I think we just need to take a minute and say, AJ Brown is wild. AJ Brown is open at every moment of every day. Poor Emmanuel Forbes. He's going to have better days ahead, but just absolutely mauled by AJ Brown 2 times. It's just AJ Brown's amazing, man.
Oh yeah, maybe taking a 165-pound cornerback, not the move, man.
Yeah. So love that. What about
definitely leaving your 165-pound quarterback in man coverage versus an absolute demon that was carved out of Mount Olympus? Also, not a good move.
Yeah, no, didn't work out.
I feel bad for him because he literally got benched after the first AJ Brown game. And
they brought it back.
It worked his way back. It was just like whatever syndrome you want to call it. It's like, dude, like why put him in the same spot?
Give him another week.
Let him guard Demario Douglas.
Exactly.
Wait a week. Put him on Juju Smith.
I do think we need to mention Devontae Smith though, because he did get there against Washington, but his 2 good games recently have come against Washington. So how are you feeling about kind of where he is and his spot in the offense?
Yeah, the usage just isn't high enough. Even this past week, 20% of the team target on 17% of his routes. He was a big DFS hit. But like the math, you can get a bye with that against the Commanders. Like 20% of the targets against the good pass defense like the Cowboys. Like I think he's more of a volatile fantasy play again this week. I like Goddard a little bit more if you're doing DFS stacking stuff with the Eagles. But with the Eagles, you kind of know what we're doing. They're another team too. Like we talk about the running back situation, like DeAndre Swift, like the last month has been very meandering as well. It's just this is where we are, man. This is the life we live. Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, hopefully you have a good running back on a good offense. That is where we are. Which actually brings us right into Tony Pollard, who has been, I think Tony Pollard is my most disappointing player of the season. And he hasn't even gotten hurt, and he's doing fine from fantasy perspective. From a season long, week to week, it's been more of a roller coaster. But one of the reasons I was so excited about Pollard was that his explosive plays over his rookie contract, even as he was getting more and more work, each season his workload increased over his rookie contract, and those explosive plays stuck around. And we just haven't seen him this year. 6.5% of his carries have gained 10 or more yards. That's 40th among qualifying backs. That means he has to live on volume, which is not, I think, what we expected from Tony Pollard. We expected we would get that volume sometimes and we would have the explosion, and that's why we would be excited for him for fantasy. It hasn't been there. This is a tough matchup. You're going to play him. Again, we're back to this. You're going to play him. But I think he is my most disappointing player of the season. I think that's kind of where I stand with Pollard.
Yeah. I would say Devontae Adams, definitely in that conversation.
I was kind of I was a little bit out on Devontae Adams already before this exact reason, and because I was worried about Jakobi Meyers' targets.
Yeah, but
And
I think it's
so,
fair because he's a guy
yeah,
you have to put in your lineup every week. Like that's the thing. Like because we've had guys get injured, and you can't label those guys because you still get to replace those players in your lineup. And like Tony Pollard's a guy that's been in your lineup every game, every week. He's been in your lineup. So like you've gone through all of this like turbulation, and it's weird. The Cowboys haven't played. They've played no normal games really. Like the 3 games that they've played a neutral game script, he has 32, 26, and 21 touches. 100 yards in all of those games. But this matchup is awful. Like, even if we get the volume, I mean, the Eagles have allowed 2 running backs to clear 50 yards. The highest rushing yards they've allowed in a game to a player is 59. They've allowed 1 rushing touchdown to a running back, and you can argue that they let that running back score that touchdown, the Breece Hall touchdown at the end of the
you
Jets
can't
game.
argue that is exactly what happened.
So
yeah.
like,
they let
this
score.
is a game. Even if you say, all right, in neutral game script, we've got this 3-game sample that when the Cowboys play in these neutral game scripts, like he's going to get 80% of the backfield touches. But is that enough in this matchup? Right? Like it's like he's going to need a big play. Like volume alone isn't going to get us here in this matchup because nobody's run on the Eagles. So he's going to need to create a big play somehow. We talked about, like, I mean, you've got Jahmyr Gibbs on by, you got Travis Etienne on by, you got Christian McCaffrey on by. Like, you're stuck with it. You got to put him in. But this is definitely not a spot I would expect like any type of a ceiling outcome.
Absolutely. And we're going to have to move on pretty quickly here, but I just wanted to give you time to talk about how wonderful CeeDee Lamb is and how this is going to continue forever, and we're never going to have to worry about CeeDee Lamb again.
I mean, we still will. It's the Cowboys. I mean, like, you know, we got to trust this offense to do the right thing all the time. But to be fair, they have done the right thing the last couple of weeks. They've moved him outside. He's played 43 and 49% of his snaps outside the past 2 weeks, his highest rates this season, and he's averaging 4.6 yards per hour. I mean, he's just a good NFL wide receiver, and he was kind of like forced to play in the slot out of necessity for the offense, but like he can win everywhere and just gives him access to more of those high cholesterol fantasy targets on the outside. So just peppering some of those in where you can get some of those downfield targets on the outside that are soaked in fantasy fat is just only going to make a player that's a good player already out of the slot even that much better for fantasy football.
This feels like a personal attack against me with all of this fat talk. I'm going to be very honest.
No. We love it.
These are personal. Yeah, look at me. If you're staring at me, you know that I'm the beef tallow. I have good beef tallow from the last time I cooked a brisket, and so now I'm very interested in this video.
You gotta make some homemade fries, man. We gotta make some homemade fries.
You need to send me that link once we get done with this. We'll figure that out for sure.
I'm thinking about.
We'll move on to the Bills and Bengals. Before we do that, though, Josh wants us to tell him how awesome his team is. Josh, you don't need to ask us. Can you rate my 16-man lineup? Burrow. No. So he's in a 16-team league. He has Burrow, CMC, Kamara, Amon-Ra, Jamar Chase, Logan Thomas, Breece Hall. Josh, you know that's a juggernaut. You don't need us to tell you that that's a juggernaut. You don't need our validation. You did awesome. Good work, Josh. That's a great team. Then we got a question here from Dylan. Made a big move, traded Ford, Goddard, and Diggs for Etienne, Hockenson, and Devonta Smith. A good move. I mean, the Diggs part of that is the only question I have here. To me, that feels like a good move. Hockenson, Goddard. I don't know. What do you kind of think of that? It feels relatively fair to me, evenish to me, but kind of how do you see it?
I think the core of his roster is improved because we were talking about it last week with the trade. Like, you know, it's easy to look at these things in a vacuum, but like, what does it do for your starting lineup? Like now his starting lineup, he listed it as ETN, Christian McCaffrey, Ayuk, Brandon Waddle. Then he's got that rotation of Zay Flowers, Contag Rashid, or Devontae Smith now. He's got Devontae Smith.
Yeah, Devontae Smith. His team's better.
So like his whole, the core of his lineup is he's putting a better lineup on the field every week, and that's what you try to do as you ramp into the fantasy playoffs. You want to think about it as when I get in the fantasy playoffs, there's no buys. What's the best roster I can put together and try to do that?
Actually, there was a trade in one of my leagues this week it was a terrible trade. There's no collusion, so it is what it is. And you move on and, hope you can benefit from it. But it was a terrible trade. And I think one of the responses from the person who was on the wrong side of the trade was, well, these 4 players are going to score the same amount as those 2 players, so why does it really matter? And that's kind of the fundamental misunderstanding of fantasy football is
Cool.
that exactly. That's why you don't draft quarterbacks as early. It's changed a bit in the best ball era, but it doesn't it doesn't matter if four players are scoring the same amount as two players, your lineup is worse because those two players have two other players there. And it's all about replacement value. And it's all about kind of what you're looking at. And I think your point about the playoffs is really important. This is the time of year. If you have a good team, if you're Josh and you have an absolute juggernaut, Josh, you don't need to do anything. You're going to win that league. Congratulations. But if you have an absolute juggernaut, what you need to be doing is trading those bench players and trying to upgrade, doing 2-for-1s and trying to upgrade because all that matters is the starting lineup. Nothing
Mhm.
else matters unless you're in best ball is the starting lineup. And I think that's the way really to approach these things. So it's a good point by you. Bills Bengals real quick. I mean, Joe Burrow's back, baby. We're back. Joe Burrow's back. I will say he still only attempted 5.7 air yards per attempt
Yep.
against the 49ers, which, I'd like to see more downfield passing. I'd like Ja'Marr Chase to be less reliant on volume, but he was healthy. He was able to
But
get
that's what the
involved,
offense was
with his
last
legs.
year.
Yeah. I mean, it is. It's true. But he was healthy. He was able to get involved with his legs. Joe Burrow's back. We're all in on this
Dude, that
offense.
play he had where Eric Armstead had him. He got out of Eric Armstead's grasp. He kind of threw like a half stiff arm. He got help from an offensive lineman and got
Yeah.
Bose on the ground, rolled out. Fred Warner drilled him and he threw this sidelong seed to T. Higgins. Like, dude, that play. Like, when I saw that, I was like, well, I guess he's just back, baby.
We're back.
And we saw like fundamentally. I mean, it wasn't just the mobility stuff. I mean, they were under center. They said they hinted towards us. They were under center for 22.6% of snaps. He had a 4% rate plier. And what that did is you got more play action. They used play action on 40.6% of the dropbacks. He was an 18.1% prior. It just allowed a lot more avenues to the Bengals to be more versatile to where they had to protect him and be in shotgun literally every single snap.
Do you want to say we made mention of the Eagles schedule? The Bengals schedule is kind of rough too. They get the Bills, then they have the Texans. We'll see what the Texans do in the wake of that terrible Panthers loss. They had no business losing that game. What a terrible loss by the Texans team. I was kind of getting excited about. But then they get the Ravens, the Steelers, the Jaguars. They have the Steelers again. They have the Chiefs later in the year. The Bengals have a bit of a tough schedule as well. But yeah, it looks like Joe Burrow's back, and that's going to be good for Chase. It's going to be good for Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon's quietly
Yeah.
he was awful last year. He's quietly been okay this year. And so if this offense is going to take a step forward, that's going to be huge for him.
He was probably a good buy low for people. I don't know if it's still open, but he probably is going to have a lot better second half of the season, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I agree. I think that he's someone you should be targeting in trades for sure. Real quick on the Buffalo backfield, they signed Leonard Fournette. He's on the practice squad right now. I don't know when he's actually going to be promoted, but does that even really change what we're getting out of Cook? It kind of doesn't to me, right?
No. Obviously you have the Damian Harris injury. Latavius Murray's been ineffective. He's getting these short yardage carries, but he's not converting them. So it could be like part of that. Listen, James Cook doesn't play in the hurry up offense and he doesn't play near the goal line. That's just kind of a problem for fantasy football for him to be like a ceiling player. And that's why we've seen the floor he's just forced to live off of efficiency. And it's fine when you can rip those runs like he was like in week 2 against the Raiders. What we've seen 3 of the past 4 weeks, he's been the RB 30 or lower in those games because he's not getting any money touches for fantasy. So he's not getting any of the beef tallow touches. Nothing in fantasy fat is soaked for James Cook right now.
that we've created a brand new fantasy saying. I can't wait until next August when we're tired of the soaked in fat. Is this guy soaked in fat? One more thing on this game. We mentioned last week we were talking about that Thursday night game, how one of the reasons I was a little bit wary on Dalton Kincaid, and that was wrong, by the way. I missed that completely. But one of the reasons I was a little bit wary is I thought we were going to see this offense change and switch completely 11 personnel and get more out of the wide receivers. And to be fair, that is what we saw. 75% of their snaps were in 11 personnel. Their first half first down drop back rate, so trying to take some of like the game script stuff out of it, was 71%, which was 60% season average before that. Wide receivers were the targets on 77% of the throws. It was 64% the season average. And so we did see this change, and we saw this offense kind of move into the direction that you've been saying for a long time this offense should move. And so I think that's
Yeah,
It wasn't the
never
best
play
game
Dawson
from
Knox
Josh
again,
Allen.
man. Never play Dawson Knox again.
It wasn't the best game from Josh Allen, but I think we're kind of excited about that moving forward. And that actually leads me right into Uncut Gems, because my Uncut Gem is Khalil Shakir, who I passed up to Mario Douglas for Khalil Shakir. I wanted to talk about him last week, but it was a Thursday night game, and I know a lot of people listen to this on Friday, and so I decided to
Mhm.
not do Khalil Shakir. I wish I would have done him last week. I might be chasing here on him because I was so excited about what we saw. But he had a 71.7% route participation last Thursday, 2.79 yards per route run. I think this Bengals Bills game is going to go off. I think this is one we are going to see it go off.
Mm.
And if this game goes off, then Shakir is getting enough. He was on the field enough last week, and I think that's going to continue. That we're going to see a pretty good game from him, in my opinion. What
Yeah,
about you? Who's
I've
your
I've
uncut gem?
always had a soft spot for Shakir as a prospect. If you listen to the show last year, me and Dan used to wax poetically about Khalil Shakir. I'm glad that he's getting an opportunity. I just really liked him as a solid player. I called him in the preview of the draft, the discounted version of Sky Moore for NFL draft. So looks like
Has he,
that could.
has he already has he already had a better career than Sky Moore? That's the open question.
It's arguable. It's arguable right now, but I did like him. I like him as a slot player. And what's cool about that matchup too this week is the Bengals haven't allowed a touchdown to an outside wide receiver. Now that when you hear stats like that, eventually that means they're probably just going to give one up this week. But they've allowed all their touchdowns to wide receivers out of the slot. So Shakir's going to get there, baby. This is the spot. I'm going with Jonathan Mingo.
Mingo.
Yeah, Mingo. We did see, out of the bye, Thomas Brown and the Carolina Panthers made some small fundamental changes. They were a base 11 personnel team on all their dropbacks that allowed Mingo to run a route on a season high 97.5% of dropbacks. They were a little more aggressive on first downs outside of the fourth quarter. They threw on first downs 58% of the time as opposed to 51% of the time prior. So just a little bit bump, but I like him for this week. Not just because of the context of the buys and some injuries, but the matchups there. Colts 25th in yards per target allowed to opposing wide receivers, bad against the boundary. But they also play so much zone, and that's where Adam Thielen has had a little bit of his reduction. He's only has a 23.4% team target share against zone coverage as opposed to a 41% target share against man coverage. So if we can just get like 2 or 3 Adam Thielen targets that go to Mingo, and Mingo go from 5 targets to 8 targets against this Colts defense, it just gives him an opportunity to be kind of like a sneaky flex guy and maybe even a DFS pivot off of the popular Demario Douglas.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. And I also think if we're kind of talking about these micro DFS things, Thielen has been such a great value over and over again. If you're playing over-unders, things like that, maybe this is a week to take the under to stay away from it a little bit. So something certainly to think about. That kind of information for every single player, every single game is available in Rich Hribar's worksheets over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Remember, you can use the code ANGLES to get 15% off any of our packages over there. So check that out. If you're listening to this in a podcast, we really appreciate it. But we do this live every Wednesday. You can come get your questions answered. We can come wax poetic about your amazing fantasy team like we did for Josh's amazing fantasy team, who can we get a cut of the prize money, Josh? I guess that's the question. Can we get a cut of the prize money here with that team that's definitely going to win? But you can come check us out on YouTube and search Warren Sharp on YouTube. You'll find us. We'll be back next week. Stay tuned to the channel. Check out what Ryan and Todd do on Thursday night. I'll be back on Sunday for the recap show. And have a great week. Talk to you soon.